So good morning. Welcome to SP Live. I'm Susan Howes, and I'm the Vice President of Engineering at Subsurface Consultants and Associates. For SPE, I serve on the U.S. Advisory Council. I'm a SPE Distinguished Lecturer, and I'm an SPE Honorary Member. So
Hi everybody, welcome to the show. We're having technical difficulties with Susan, I'm afraid, so let us just kick off. We have an amazing show today. We are going to be talking about change management, so it's all about adaptability. As you see, we are having to adapt ourselves at the moment with these technical changes. So today's talk, turning point on an engineering change for the business. So we're talking about change management. How it impacts individual workers, engineers, leaders in upstream oil and gas. Also, why it's important, how does it affect you, what can you do, and how can it benefit you. So we have a really great panel of speakers today. So let me just quickly introduce them. So we have Marisa Mikolas. She is President and Change Practice Lead at Energy Innova. She's a certified change manager with experience that spans digital oilfield, M&A integration, new business launch for employers, including Baker Hughes and Microsoft. Currently on the transformation committee for SPE Digital Energy Technical Section. We met with Marisa in several earlier SPE Gulf Coast section board positions. So she and I go back a way. Also on the panel today, Michael Bahunik. He's Senior Drilling Advisor at the Apache Corporation. He leads D&C in O&E and technology, so operational excellence and technology, including leveraging real-time drilling data with asynchronous data to improve drilling performance. Uses data analytics on large unconnected data streams to build prediction algorithms and achieve optimization. So a lot of change management in and around those processes, as we will hear later on. Also on the panel, Dr. Jim Crompton, Professor of Practice, Petroleum Engineering Department, Colorado School of Mines. He retired after 37 years at Chevron, so that's quite a track record there. He's now chair of the fellows, highest rung on the technical ladder at Chevron. So really good long career, good recognition for all his input. He has co-authored two books. He's a prolific author of SPE technical papers, and he's the chair of the Digital Transformation Committee for SPE Digital Energy Technical Section. Also today, Elizabeth Perlali. She is Senior VP Digital Unit at ENI. She started her career in consulting, joined ENI over 20 years ago in the gas business, so midstream. She now heads the Change Management Competency Center and Initiative Promotions for ENI in their new digital business unit. And finally, Autumn Shannon. She's a financial analyst at Marathon Oil Corporation. Prior to her current role, when she is in strategic economic planning, she was a reservoir engineer for the Eagle Ford. And before joining Marathon, she worked for the WPX Energy company as a reservoir engineer at the Williston and Hastings basins. She has a degree from the mines and an MBA from Regis. Her focus is on strategic leadership and change. So also, an important part of our discussion today will be about how do we lead change in organizations. Now to you, our dear audience, Please engage in our conversation. This is an opportunity for you to ask all these great experts questions on change management. How can I affect change? What do I do? What are expectations around leadership? What are the benefits of change management? So let's kick off with today's first question to the panel.
So, Niels, this is Susan.
Hi, Susan. Welcome back.
Sorry, I was muted earlier.
Okay. I will let you get back to your panels. So please kick off with the first question.
Right. I'm Susan Howes. I'm Vice President of Engineering at Subsurface Consultants and Associates, and I'm your moderator for today's panel. And as Neil said, please participate by putting your comments in the chat. We will get to your questions, but tell us about your experience with change management and maybe even some examples of some experience you have in that area. We'll also be sharing links to papers that our panelists have written, so you'll find those in the chat. So be sure and follow along there. And we'd like to recognize the SB Foundation for sponsoring our event today. So Marisa, tell us about why is change management getting so much buzz right now?
Thank you, Susan. Well, the need for our industry to make many fundamental changes is quite pressing. And as previous SPE live broadcasts have made clear, we have a lot of work to do. I think the buzz stems from a concern that the odds actually may not be in our favor. And in fact, that's very well grounded because 70 to 75% of change undertakings do not succeed. And that statistic has remained constant for over 25 years. So it's essential that facing what we're facing, we have to adopt the best practices that the successful have used. And the key differentiator has been well-executed change management.
Great, capturing those lessons learned and best practice. Jim, can you tell us about, is there a lack of dedicated change management competencies in today's workforce? And how can they adopt and sustain change management? And when we have the current low oil prices and other industry headwinds, COVID-19, is it more important to get this right now than before?
Well, I think it's very much more important, more critical, immediate. We have the lower commodity prices. So once again, the emphasis is on lower operating costs. The industry is really trying to focus that on automation, on analytics, and different things like that to lower maybe the labor component and have greater insight into our operations. So I agree with Marisa that the time is now, but our track record is not great. The digital oil field, which is an area I've been working in for probably over 20 years, I mean, we could have the same conversation in 2000. We are pretty successful at pilots. We are pretty successful at implementing technology and changing the way we work on a small basis. Maybe it's an asset or a function or whatever, but scaling it up to the enterprise, which really we have to do now to make that big difference, is a problem. Change management is not forgotten, it's just misunderstood. And that's why I like the way you use the term competency. Most project managers know they need to communicate, so they bring a communications person on, or they know they need training, so there's a training aspect and all the rest of it. But change management is more than that. And I think that a lot of our struggles with this has become, we fail to really encompass all that change management is.
It's really one of those business management leadership competencies that are so important.
Correct.
Elizabeth, what is change for you? How do you define change?
Change management for me is essentially three things. Is changing the approach daily. So be more curious and open to different point of view and a way to do things differently, thinking out of the box to do better what we already do very well. So we have to start looking differently to discover new nuance and opportunities. So focusing all the energy not to fight in the past, but to build in the new, creating values for our companies. The second is dare more, to be more brave in experimenting solutions and supporting people to experiment solutions, and even small steps count. So be very concrete and communicate by example and cases what have been done, and to be very tangible. And the third and very important point to me is upskilling. Upskilling on the job means being more humble and understanding that the changes lead all of us to a continuous learning by doing together with others. So this is what I think it is change management. So it's not a typical definition. It's what I think about the change management. But before giving back the word, I would like to launch a request for the audience, which is if you could reply in the chat, just simply with yes or no, if you do like changing, and if you do like traveling, and we will be back on that. So only yes or no, please. Thank you.
Great. We're already getting some questions in the chat. This one is for Marisa. How has the oil and gas industry reacted to COVID-19 in relation to change management compared to other industries?
That is really a great question. In a lot of ways, we have done quite well because of our experience globally and operating remotely. So the cultural transition has, while not easy, it was something that we were able to execute. But the fundamental here is around the adoption of these practices and taking care of people as they go through the transition of adopting these practices. So we set up new practices, and then we have to get people to move through them. There are a number of industries, even our downstream colleagues were less comfortable moving out of the office than we were, but there still has remained a lot of angst and distress going through the process of figuring out how to operate remotely on a regular basis. So I think I'm going to put us kind of in the middle. I think that the financial arena moved quite quickly, and I think there are others that have had more difficulty. In our particular case, though, and really across the board with COVID, change management was handled not by the business, but by HR.
Good point. So, Michael, let's build on that. Who plays a role in change management from your perspective in drilling and completions engineering?
Well, what I found from my experience in many different types of change management, whether it's a process or digitization, or for those folks that have gone through an SAP implementation, which can be quite rough. Interesting that the most effective ones I found are ones that are owned by the business. If it's being led by a support function, many cases it turns to be like a cast off. It starts off very strong, say we're going to do this from a management leadership standpoint, and then it's tedious. Let's face it, it's tough, and there's other things people like to be doing. I'm an engineer. I like to engineer and design wells, but come around and I got to focus on changing a process or something like that. I'm not so interested. So unless the business owns it, what will happen is it becomes a big push, and therefore it gets really difficult. And you'll see that I think Jim mentioned, jumping out of a pilot to scale up. That's where a lot of them fail in that chasm there and die off and not deliver the results that the change was, what was for the business case put forward.
Thank you. Another question from the audience. How can change help with depleting fields, brownfields, where maintenance has increased, and how can we implement it effectively?
I'll start with on the brownfield side of things. I really propose this is to take a wider view. Everything is connected. So when you even do a change management program, you need to realize what other things you might affect. And when it comes to brownfield, which is very challenging from a cost maintenance standpoint, is I need to relook at what I've been doing, where I've been my downtimes. I've done a Pareto chart. The interesting thing to me is we talk a lot about continuous improvement. Well, that means continuous change. And so many people really actually don't think that through very well, because to be effective, you have to change something, right? Otherwise, you get the same outcome. And brownfield is exactly that way. And you've got to put a cross-functional team, a couple of outsiders, maybe a protagonist, and rethink the problem. Where is our issues, and can we do it differently? Same thing with like compressors. Are we using data from the compressors to make sure they stay up? All those type of things can have a substantial impact, but it's going to be a lot of things. It's not going to be a silver bullet in brownfield. You're probably going to have to pick 100 items to make a serious impact, but you can do it.
Thank you. And Autumn, let's bring you into the conversation. What's more important in decision-making and prioritization, the technical excellence or the business objectives?
Good morning, Susan.
Morning.
One thing is, if you had asked me this question 5 years ago, I probably would have answered technical excellence. I definitely think differently now. This brings up an important point of contention between engineers and business leaders in our industry today. Business strategy does not always support collecting information for the sake of science. One of the things you need to do is have a complementary relationship between technical excellence and business objectives. When those two compete in your decision-making process, then that's when you need to apply your change management principles.
Thank you. We have another interesting question that I think you might be able to help us with. The current situation with production curtailments and shutdowns is leading to complex problems with restarting wells, especially in high water cut wells. So what are the challenges with change management in regard to shutdowns?
This is actually a huge problem for all companies, and one I've been involved in conversations at my own. One of the things that whenever we're looking at shutting in wells, and this was a common practice, is, is it economically viable to keep those running in our low price environment? So now that we're bringing them back on, you still have to look at the economics. Does that make sense to bring it on? Can we afford to do that, or is that going to lose us cash flow on the business side? So even though on a technical side, it may cost us a certain amount to get that well running, from an economic standpoint, it may not make sense.
Thank you. Elisabetta, back to you. We're getting some responses on your two questions. Most people love traveling, but not so much changing.
Exactly. So as far as I saw from the chat,
I can't hear Elisabetta's audio.
I'm on. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I'm on.
I'm still not hearing her, so hopefully everyone else can hear her.
And the other can hear me. Okay, it's fine. No, I'm pleased to see that it went more or less as I expected, because most of people like traveling, and some people, most of people have doubt regarding changes. But the thing is that changing is like traveling. Anytime you start to travel, you don't know where for a new destination. You don't know exactly what you will find, which culture, which food, which attitude of people. But when you come home, you realize that you are enriched in a way or in another. I mean, you may have loved or not the place where you went, but you were curious when you went, and you are more rich when you're back. Changing is the same thing. Very often you don't know what's happening. You may be forced to change, and in this case, if you don't mind, I saw a question from Diana that I would like to pick up. They said, I like traveling, plan change is okay for me, drastic change and unexpected tend to struggle with. I like this, and sorry to take 1 second on that, because unfortunately we have to, and we had the lesson from COVID, for example. We need to be very, very ready to be willing to change also suddenly. And it's more and more like that. When we talk about new, the new normal, I think it's never normal now. We have to be ready. So do think about changing like a travel for a destination you don't know, but do consider that every time you take back a value.
So I want to just add to what Elizabeth has said. I mean, so many times in my experience, you see that dichotomy that she talks about. You know, you ask people, do you want to change if you're in control of the change? Like, I'm planning my vacation. Well, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of, there's things that, you can't control everything, but you make the travel arrangements, the hotel arrangements, the venues that you want to see. So, that idea of, yes, people, if you want to change something in your life, go see a new place or whatever, the answer is frequently yes. Same in the oil business, in your work practice. If you see things that are inefficient, you see things that could be done better or whatever, you'll say yes. But getting back to Michael's point, I mean, all of a sudden, if this becomes that competition that Autumn talked about, if it becomes the push that Michael talked about, then if you ask the question, do you want to be changed? Kind of change the verb there. Then most people will say, no, I don't want to be forced to do something I don't like. I don't want to be forced to do something I'm comfortable with, or, kind of get out of, change the tool that I've, really mastered and I can work with. So when you get to that competition that Autumn talked about, then you're in a situation where you've not done change management well. You should with competencies and the rest of that, stakeholder analysis, all these different things, you should be able to foresee those clashes. You should be able to avoid the pushes when in your project. When you get to there, you're stuck. When you get to there, your change has stopped. So the whole idea of, I mean, yes, communication is important. Yes, training is important. Yes, there's various different things, but understanding how the change is going to impact all the people that are involved. And as Michael kind of said, what you really need is to give, I mean, there needs to be leadership. There needs to be a definition of what the business objective is. So I agree with Autumn again, it's business first. But the whole idea of understanding how people change, not everybody changes the same way. And that is the ingredients of a successful change management program.
Thanks, Jim. And you're a professor now, but you've worked in a large corporation at Chevron. So how do change management resources get justified for programs?
Well, that's kind of a good question, because frequently it's under project management office or whatever it is. So, and again, I haven't seen too many cases where people say it's not important at all, but I've seen too many cases where the resources are allocated just as the communication specialist, who is somebody that can put together good slides or a snazzy video or whatever it is. And then the whole training aspect, and of course, training far too often I've seen get cut because the whole project takes too long and some other aspect eats up too much of the budget, and then we don't have enough for training at the end. But usually there at the beginning there are some resources set aside. Now, whether where do they go? It might be HR, as Marissa talked about. It might be IT. It might be a consulting organization that comes in that fills these sort of niche tasks, I'll call it, not a competency. and those usually get into the budget. The problem is it's broader than that, and their change management does fit with project management, but it needs to be, at the table from the beginning to help the whole idea of what is the scope, what are the roles, how does leadership play, and that's what I don't see the resources committed to often enough.
Thank you. So
I'd like to build on something that Jim just said. I think he really set it up beautifully, that a best practice that I've seen is that as we're designing our programs and our projects, we include an assessment of how much the success of our project depends on some substantial change in people's behavior or a shift in mindset. And by that, I mean, are we just revving a version of Outlook, or are we implementing a brand new remote operations center? And so when our success of our program that's tied to processes and technology depends a great deal on people accepting and adopting new ways of doing things, then that is something that needs to be included in our planning and acknowledged and included in our budgeting. We need to budget to anticipate and mitigate risk. And so that starts to bring us into a way to articulate and fund what's necessary to be successful. Otherwise, we wind up like the 70 to 75% who aren't successful.
right. And here's a good, Elizabeth, did you have a comment?
Yes, I have. I just would like to add up, because I definitely agree with Jim and Maryse. I would just say it's very paramount, really paramount to have the change management from the very beginning, because what makes people reluctant is not to know the why things are done. Right. And they just feel that that adoption as an imposition, which is very bad. I mean, the people should understand from the beginning why things are done, how are done, who are doing them, why, because like that they metabolize, and when it's metabolized, then it becomes natural. So it's really fundamental to have that included from the very beginning.
Thank you. I think this is a good question coming in from our audience. When we talk of change management, we discuss it from the top down, manager-led. Is it possible to drive change from the bottom up? And Autumn, I'm going to ask you to start. Give us a millennial perspective as an individual contributor.
Absolutely. I definitely think change management and being a change agent is everyone's job. One of the things that, especially as Jim and Marisa were talking, is anyone can do this. It doesn't have to be the project manager. It doesn't have to be your CEO. If you see something that you think needs to be changed, one, there's probably somebody else that agrees with you, and two, go do it. This is the part of the future of our industry, is that you have to take the responsibility to go out and get it done.
Thank you. And Michael, you had some experience to share?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that one of the important things is, I think from a management perspective, you want to put in the change, is that you're there to set the environment. You're to be setting a support mechanism. And you're going to have to basically trust your people to go about and implement the change. So what you want to try to do is try to empower them, encourage your change agents. It's not easy being a change agent, obviously. And a couple of the secret sauces to this is and reflect back on Jim, is that help grease the wheels. Take time to understand the people you're trying to change, what role they're playing. And because a lot of times you feel like if you're receiving this change, it's more I got to do. And if you start out in the project, in the design phase, say, hey, what can I do in these roles to make their life easier? Then you find that it goes a lot simpler, that it's not a push, and it starts to be a pull, and they get excited about it. And now there are always going to be some naysayers, and that's another part of this discussion.
And Marisa?
I think this is really powerful stuff that I'm sure the audience is hanging on. I want to tie it together with something that I've used, and that is that when change permeates the business side, it's very helpful to think of roles through that change management lens. And I really like using a sports analogy. Okay, in this situation, a business leader is like a head coach. They set the change agenda, they determine where the organization is going to go and how they're going to get there. The change management role is like a specialty coach, and they bring talents and competencies to bring our people along the journey to get where the leadership has set our goal. And so really everything about change management is it's a team sport and everyone has a role to play.
Thank you, Marissa. Here's another question from the audience. How, in your experience, have you overcome the traditional mindset of we've always done it this way and we've been fine? That mindset that they don't want to change because don't break what's working.
Well, if I could jump in on that one.
Please, Jim.
It clearly happens a lot. And Michael alluded to the fact that, often when you are that change agent like Autumn and said, well, I'm going to just go change this, you're going to find somebody said, hell no, not me, right? So that we're comfortable in what we have done is a frequent reaction from people who feel that there's someone's trying to move their cheese, as the famous book goes. But I think what you need to do is to share data, share the reason why you're not fine. I mean, the common process is you have a comfortable state, then you need to break it, then you need to reform it, and then you need to sustain it.
Right.
So the break it step needs to be by sharing more information. Well, maybe the asset is working along and everything's fine and everybody knows their job and oil is getting produced and they're meeting their metrics, et cetera, et cetera. But what they need, someone needs to come in and say why those metrics aren't fine. They need to change the goal from that management enable section. You say yes, you are producing oil and gas fine, but you're losing money. Or yes, you are working all right, but your safety statistics are poor versus where we want to be with our goals. You need to break that comfort level, and this is the hard part. And often it's by sharing data, and often it's by getting their input. And maybe they're hiding behind that comfort level, and really they will have a bunch of gripes that they'd like to fix too. But there is a discomfort level in change often, and you have to break that. Not invented here. We're comfortable. We're doing just fine. We've always done it this way. Whatever kind of that feeling is, you have to somehow disturb that, and hopefully disturb it with real data, and disturb it by listening to others, and disturb it by sharing benchmarks, and then to get them to say, okay, it's not so fine. How can we fix it and involve them?
Yeah, on that.
Elisabetta?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Now, if I may add to what Jim said, I experience also that what is always winning is showing examples. Small or big, showing examples to reluctant people or people that say, I work well like that, as I've always done. You have to show how better they can do. And if it's something which is really tangible, they can see, then I really believe that seeing is believing anytime. So it would be difficult to go again a data or again something which has been proven as better. And it's responsibility to be again. So this is really something that you have to fight against, and you will win if you prove with examples.
Thank you. Here's another great question from the audience. Frontline personnel and mid-level managers often feel burdened by initiative overload. How do we ensure that we're not overloading the organization with competing initiatives? And how do we shift the mindset to continuous improvement?
I'm going to take a leap here. I think that when changes are going on, people bring resistance. And by the way, resistance is a good thing. It means they're actually giving you a chance to work with them and help them through it. But you're right, we do have what's called change fatigue, and there are actually limits. That's where the role of change management strategy and specialists coaching, working with leadership and with the business make a dramatic difference in returning the organization to productivity. One of the facts of the matter, which we hate to acknowledge, is that change takes time, and processing change does take time. And just like the funding needs to be included in our projects, some scheduling needs to be included in our projects. The change management helps us manage the complexity of multiple changes at once, which is really where we're going to be living for a while.
So,
Great.
yeah,
Jim?
Melissa just said two things that are very, very important, but they're the last two things in the world a project manager needs. I need more budget and I need more schedule time, right? Because they are graded on time, on budget performance. I think one of the things we have to look at, and the basis of this question is a very real issue, because most oftentimes those frontline workers complaining that there's too much on their plate, they're absolutely right. And someone has to step back, management has to step back and say, well, all am I asking people to do? And in these times of low commodity prices, and we've seen them before and we'll see them again, often this is the time when the management stops spending. They ask you to do it quicker. They want you to do this job and that job and some other job with regard to these sort of things. So that's where this whole thing involves managing the ecosystem, like Michael talked about, that you have to look at all the things you're asking people to do. And you have to look at all the things that you are rewarding them for. Because, I think if you take a good look at not only how much work you're asking people to do, how many hours are they working? Is there a safety issue? Are their bonuses working against the change you're asking? Are there contract terms with suppliers that are working against the things that you want to change? So, again, Michael talked about opening the scope and looking at all these kind of aspects of it. But, these things are often a lot more complex than somebody says. So I'll just say, here's this fantastic new tool, just use it and everything will be better, and we'll stop there. Well, what about the data? What about the work process? What about the contracts? All of a sudden it does get complicated, and the PMO's job is to try to make it simple, right? So they will, sometimes you're going to get the case where even the project manager is the resistor in what you're trying to do because of on time, on budget, sort of constraints that were put on him or her by management.
So the human factors element, that interface between people and technology, that's an important aspect. Michael, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, and one other thing I want to follow up on Jim and Maurice, is that, sometimes there's not always an honest conversation that happens at the senior management level. So especially if you're in not a hierarchical organization, it's even worse in some type of matrix organization. A lot of times there's competing efforts by a lot of VPs and things like that, and they don't come together to realize the effect that they're having because they want to drive this change for their function or this part of the business unit. And so there has to be a clearinghouse for doing this. And I think sometimes an outside third party can help facilitate those conversations and help set the priorities then, that what needs to get done. And so make the recognize the impact they're putting on their organizations. Many, I find, some executives don't, just because they ask a question, people will run off and start doing something. And so a little bit of coaching there and causing that, I'll call honest conversation about really what are our top 3 things we want to get done, and then we work the list. But that's
great. I think that relates to another question from our audience. Do you believe that external mentors, coaches, to use Marissa's term, will be used more given the current lack of internal staffing, specifically in the change management competency?
Maybe I
Marissa?
can start on this one.
Oh, go ahead, Autumn.
Oh, I was gonna say, for the person that asked this, if you feel like you need to be coached and you're not getting it from your company, then go find it for yourself. People need to drive their own careers, and one of the things is if your company doesn't have the resources to help you with that, or you don't have somebody like a boss that you trust at your company that can lead you in those conversations, then that's why these external resources are available to everybody. It definitely is a benefit to everyone to continue improving themselves and improving their skills.
And SPE is a great place to find external mentors if you're looking for that.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
Here's another question from the audience. Meeting the challenges of the day isn't going to be easy, but now is a defining moment for leaders. Do you think the only way to support employees while ensuring the long-term success of an organization is to balance deep empathy with economic realities? There's some trade-offs, right? Jim?
Let me have a go. I hadn't had that term deep empathy before because I've been through a lot of reorganizations where there was very, very little empathy and a whole lot of economic realities in terms of how, in those cases, balance.
It's a balancing act.
But I think here, you know, we're talking about a defining moment, and I think part of this is I won't call it a generational kind of perspective on the organization and that. And I think Autumn has done a brilliant job of describing what I'll call the new workforce attitude. And it's different than what my attitude was back, you know, in the 19th century when I started in the oil and gas business. But that's a joke, by the way. But Autumn described this idea that of personal responsibility, that you are the change agent, that if you don't have something, go find a way to get it. Don't stop because your boss says I can't afford that consultant or I can't afford that training or whatever. You know, there's a ways of getting it anyway, right? And so that personal responsibility, I think, is, first of all, is refreshing, and it is necessary. Because, you know, my generation might have said, well, you know, my career really belongs to my boss. He's going to tell me what to do. Autumn is saying my career belongs to me, and I'm going to figure out what I need to do. That different approach, you know, is a difference between top down and bottoms up. It is the difference between how you approach things that you need to do versus, you know, waiting for your company to take care of you. And I think her approach is the one that's going to survive. That approach is the one that's going to make you know, careers for this next generation. My students that I'm teaching in my class, they're going to have that attitude, because, you know, my generation sitting around and waiting for a company to take care of them. When prices were $100 of oil, they took care of me pretty damn well. When they were $30 a barrel, all of a sudden I was a cost and not an asset, and there wasn't a whole lot of empathy.
Thank you, Jim, for that perspective. For those millennials, the young professionals who are trying to develop change as a competency, change management as a competency, where do you see opportunities for them to do that?
Oh my, that is just that is just everywhere. There are a host of areas. I mean, your career development is sort of job one, of course. It ranges from pursuits around sustainability, or around launching a new business, or digital transformation, or data analytics. Let's see.
Sustainability.
Yes, and sustainability, and a host of the things that we're going to be needing to be, our industry is on on the hook we're moving forward, and we see our leadership shifting the direction of our ships of state to go in those directions. So there really isn't anything that doesn't involve change. In fact, it's relevant in your family with your, getting your kids or understanding what your kids are trying to do. There's just a host of areas to apply this, and there's lots of resources to help.
Thank you. So I think we're at the time in our program where it's time to ask for a few key takeaways from each of you as we wrap things up. Jim, we'll start with you.
Well, I hate to bring a Bob Dylan song lyric to SPE panel, but I think there's a phrase from an old song, and half the audience doesn't even know who Bob Dylan is, so I apologize. But he had a song said, "Those who aren't being born are busy dying," and that's a change is constant kind of message, and it's a change is personal kind of message. And I think, the idea, whether it's low oil prices, whether it's a technology change, a work process change, an employment change, whatever it is. I mean, if you look at where are the opportunities, the answer is right in front of your face. And they're here at the job today and they're here in the job tomorrow. Dealing with change is a way of living and surviving and sustaining. And if, anytime we want to fix and say, I'm good now, this is my bunker, I'm going to fortify myself against that, you're wrong. And, get out there and learn how to fight. Don't find a safe hole and try to hide.
Autumn, what are your key takeaways from this morning's session?
I think one thing that we all have to remember is change is hard for everybody. And so as you are, being a change agent, if you can personally, take a step back and look and say, how can I change and make the situation easier on other people? Then as you're asking others to change, they'll see the change in you. And that's definitely a leadership skill that can be practiced. So I encourage everybody to continue learning and, be patient with change.
Michael, what are your key messages from today?
Well, I think it started early on when we started the conversation, is for change to happen, it really helps to don't let a crisis go to waste. And we're in a crisis right now. So actually, it's very fertile soil to kick off change projects. And vice versa, what has to happen is create a crisis internally. The business is suffering. If we don't get better, we're going to have to do something more drastic. I think it really helps people to wake up, at least consider change, especially at the management when you're trying to sell it as a business case. Thank you.
Thank you. Elisabetta, what would you like to remember from today's session?
I would remember that time for easy oil and gas is over. So we need to change now, and the change is irreversible. So I think that cannot be avoided. We have to be ready for that in any moment. We need to overcome all our bias and take a position and really look beyond, to be humbler, listen actively, and grasp the new perspectives that are there.
Thank you. Marisa, how about you?
Well, I think it's come through from our conversation that change management is, everyone has a role in doing that. And yet, for some of us, we're more drawn to it, and for some of us, we're less comfortable with that. That's okay. If that's not if you're not as comfortable with that, then partner with someone who is, to help complement your strengths. And we're always in a learning process. I like to say we would never drill a well without involving an engineer in some way, okay? How can we expect to undertake the class and caliber of transformation that faces us without solid change management capability?
Excellent, thank you. And I'll pull up a quote from our audience here. Credit goes to Eric Shinsinski about transformation. If you dislike change, you're going to dislike irrelevance even more.
Good.
So with that closing note, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the SP Foundation. I'd like to thank our guests, Jim, Autumn, Michael, Elisabetta, Marisa, and thank you for SPE for setting up these SP Live sessions for us during the working from home time of COVID-19. Please join us again next week when we take a look at oilfield technology and completion fluids in particular. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.